I might move my stuff then. And then like all the information it sounds like my lens, but again, I'm sorry. I'm there. I do. But the people is good.
Are we ready to go?
The politicians in other words,
is that on? Yeah. We're about to get started, folks. Si alguien necesita traducción, pues pueden buscarme allá en el público, ¿ok?
Thanks everybody for coming. This event kicks off the City from Below conference, which you're all very aware of. We hope it goes well. We're really happy to have David Harvey here today and revisit A View from Federal Hill, which was 1998, 99, 88. Sorry. A lot has changed standing here looking at Baltimore's harbor, and so let's talk about it.
Okay, I'm still not quite sure what I'm supposed to do, but let's just throw some things and then maybe you can ask questions and we can discuss a bit. One of the things it's really useful to remember is that capitalism sort of goes through phases of boom and bust. And actually when I was writing The View from Federal Hill, it was a moment of bust. Big bust, actually. Around that time, something like 600 financial institutions in the country went bankrupt. There was a serious crisis in the savings and loan industry, and the Maryland Savings and Loan Deposit Insurance Corporation went bankrupt, and some people who had their money in some of these savings and loan associations like Old Court and Merit couldn't get their money out for about 2 or 3 years. So this was, if you like, a period of crisis which is very much about the patterns of urban development of the time. And I think one of the things we tend to have is a sort of amnesia about these past crises, and it's worthwhile remembering that what had happened here around Inner Harbor from the 1970s to the late 1980s, that period was a period of very rapid transformation of the Baltimore economy and a great deal of emphasis on the reconstruction of downtown and the reorganization of downtown as a consumer place, as an office space, and this was a period when Baltimore went from being a blue-collar town with a lot of industrial employment to being essentially a white-collar town. And I think that the hiatus that occurred at the end of the 1980s, the end of that property boom, was caught up with the financial crisis. And so I think that one of the things I would want to say about today's financial crisis, or the foreclosure crisis, is that we should look at it in part as an urban crisis. And for that reason, I think it's worthwhile looking at what happened, if you like, in the last urban crisis of the late 1980s, which was when I was writing this thing about The View from Federal Hill. In effect, the end of the 1960s, early 1970s, saw the city in a very desperate sort of situation, which followed upon the uprisings in the city after the assassination of Martin Luther King. At that time, a large proportion of the inner city was going out. There were fires, there was looting, there was violence. They had to bring the tanks in, the National Guard in to control the city, And basically the sense was that the city was in a situation where nobody could possibly want to invest in it, nobody would want to live here, given that almost everybody through the 1960s who had money had fled the city and suburbanized. So the big problem was what to do. Now I came to this city in 1969, and at that time hardly any of this at all existed. Just the Maryland National Bank, you can see the gold sort of tower at the back, and a few other buildings, and that was basically it. And the big question was how to revitalize this part of the city, how to bring things back into town. And there were a coalition formed of all sorts of people, you know, business people who were interested in revitalizing the city for commercial purposes, but also you would say liberals and others who had some sort of passionate involvement in the city. And one of the people who had passionate involvement at that time was the chair of the department at Johns Hopkins that I had just joined, a guy called Reds Wallman, and Reds stands for the color of his hair, not his politics. And he became very involved in the city and housing questions and employment questions, even though he was a physical scientist, and he was deeply committed to the idea of trying to bring back the city in a more humane kind of way. And for that reason, he took over and decided to try to work with questions of housing in the city, and I got then involved myself a lot in what was going on in the low-income housing in the city, and got to know the city pretty well from that perspective, and then started to recognize what was going on here in terms of the commercial development. Now, the idea came up around 1970. What to do in the wake of the eruptions that had occurred in 1968. And the idea came that we'd run a city fair. And the idea was that this is a city of neighborhoods, very diverse neighborhoods with different ethnic backgrounds, Lithuanian, you know, Polish, and the neighborhoods still had a very strong ethnic character, so the idea was to try to bring the city together around the idea that this was a city of ethnic neighborhoods, and that therefore we should have a collective fair where we all came together in a sense to reassert that this was a city that was worth living in, it was a city worth being part of. And the city fair occurred in 1970, and it was pretty much a great success, and within 2 or 3 years the city fair was bringing 2 million people downtown. And that was a very important demonstration, if you like, that the city was not necessarily dead, that therefore there was a possibility to try to reconstruct a downtown which would bring, if you like, initially the population of the city together, and then as time went on, of course, bring people in from outside. And to that end, Rouse, who was at that time a pioneer of urban redevelopment of this kind, suggested that he would build some sort of pavilions and harbor place type thing, and there was a big argument about where he should do it and how he should do it. And the initial idea was that he would be given the power plant over there, and that he would convert that inside. He basically said, no, that's not a good idea. I'm a real estate developer, and real estate developers know there's a very great importance of location, location, and location. And I want this corner down here. The trouble was this corner down here was public land, and there was a big fight over the big question of whether he would be allowed to build on that public land, and there was a referendum, I think in 1975, on that question. Very narrowly one referendum for the commercial interest to be able to rebuild this part of the center of the city this way. Now, at that time, also there were other proposals. One of the proposals I really like is the Science Museum over here. And one of the things that's very peculiar about its design is you notice it has solid brick backside, and that's because over here in sharp Leadenhall there was an African-American population, and there was a terrific fear that they would raid the city, trash the windows, this kind of thing. So it's actually built as a military establishment, as kind of an outpost of the inner harbor, to try to defend against the possible violence that might come from that sharp Leadenhall kind of African American population. It didn't really matter because within about 10 years gentrification had taken over Sharp Leadenhall, and so they disappeared, but you're left with a horrible, horrible design of the Maryland Science Center that they still have a terrible time trying to reorganize in such a way as to make it a civilized place to be in. So that was one of the first, if you like, buildings that came in here. Then after that, Rouse built the pavilions, and then there was a tremendous kind of period where public subsidies were coming in, and this was a period when Mayor Schaefer, who was elected I think in 1971, became the mayor and really espoused this notion of a public-private partnership. And interestingly, at that time the banks were very reluctant to invest in the city. So what Schaefer did was to set up a reconstruction bank of his own, a kind of a private, quasi-public entity, which created in effect what many people came to call a shadow government. These were where the real decisions were being made. And this is something I think it's really important to think of right now, because if a mayor can do that in order to get commercial development going, why can't a mayor build up something of that kind to try to get actually more social justice in the city, a better kind of division of goods and services and all the rest of it in the city? In other words, there are ways in which you can bypass the normal banking practices if you want, and I think that's a very important issue today. My own view is, right, today that we probably need to set up something the equivalent of a national reconstruction bank, although maybe we don't want to call it bank, but something of that kind that can actually deal with the catastrophic effects of the foreclosure crisis on the ground in many parts of the country, and deal with the fact that homelessness is rising at the same time as vacant buildings are cropping up all over the place and abandoned buildings are all over the place. So if the crazy system in California of tent cities arising in the midst of sort of empty, abandoned housing, which seems to me is an invitation to invasion and taking them over and all the rest of it. But that could be done with official support if you had a kind of institution that was be prepared to sort of say, okay, we're going to take over that housing and bring the people in. Anyway, what then followed was a whole series of tremendous subsidies that came from the city to try to get commercial activity in here. The building over there, which is the Hyatt, the glass building, which is the Hyatt building, that was, I think, about $500,000. Hyatt put about $500,000 into $35 million. The rest of it was actually built by the city. And the idea was that the city owned the walls and the Hyatt owned the interior. It was a very peculiar kind of sort of arrangement for many years. That tall building over there, the Harbour Towers, was actually built on very prime land for almost nothing. I mean, again, it was subsidized. The guy who built it promised he would actually put a lot of money into revitalizing the area around Lexington Market, which is largely African-American sort of shopping area, but of course the guy never did anything of the sort. He built the building, got rid of the properties, and then sort of disappeared from town. So this is the sort of thing that was going on at this time in this harbour area, but that was supposed to compensate for the tremendous wave of job closures. And the job closures in the late 1980s were really pretty catastrophic. In some cases, you're just dealing, as was Bethlehem Steel way down there, with reduction of the workforce, but in other cases you have Western Electric and all the rest of it down here that were actually just closing down, losing 3,500 jobs or something of that kind, abandoning. So that was the time, like I said, when Baltimore started to become a white-collar city rather than a blue-collar city. And of course this area right here, and I hadn't seen this new building down here because I haven't been here for a while, but this area down here was the Bethlehem Steel ship repair yards. This area over here was an area over here that used to have the Union Hall, and the ship repair yards closed down about 1983-85, and this was when the boom was on, and somebody saw this as a great space where you could actually build all sorts of stuff, and so they proposed 2 towers like that, and actually they were even higher than that, and there was a big fight in the community here in terms of both because of the loss of jobs. Many of the people here worked in the Bethlehem ship repair yards, and they were going to build 2 of those, and there was a lot of complaints about losing sight of the water. But the interesting thing right now, of course, is we stand here and we hardly see the water anymore. You know, it's sort of disappeared behind a mass of this, and over there, well, it's disappeared more by the fact there's marinas and all of the rest of it. So there was an attempt, if you like, to compensate for all of those losses that were going on in jobs in that area and the declining industrial structure of Baltimore there, and many and increasing unemployment in the ethnic neighborhoods which are over there, which is sort of East Baltimore with the row houses and the sort of famous row house area of East Baltimore. And it always struck me when you're looking over there that this is a very different scene from the scene you see down here, which is essentially commercial buildings and banks now. Now, during this period then, there was a considerable revitalization which was really constructed around a public-private partnership in which, as now, and this is a principle, of course, which is basic to the whole neoliberal period, in effect, what you do is you privatize the profits and you socialize the risks. You know, the private takes all of the profits, and if there's a problem, then the city is left with it.